Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Terrian. I'm the CEO of the Columbus Council on World Affairs, and it's really a pleasure to have each one of you here today talking about global health and trends in women's health in particular. There's several folks and organizations that made today's event possible. I want to make sure to thank the Cardinal Health Foundation. Ola here and Jesse are both representing as our lead sponsor for today. Please join me in thanking the Cardinal Health Foundation. Yeah, thank you. We also have some promotional partners for today's event, the Women's Fund of Central Ohio, and Kelly, thank you for being here, Equitas Health, The Ohio State University, and WELD, Women in Economic Leadership Development, Barb Smoot. Thank you for helping promote and get the word out for today's program. Yes, yes. All right, let's get into today's conversation, because based on the talk that was happening earlier, we're ready to discuss. I'd like to introduce someone to present our speaker today who comes to us from Cardinal Health, Ms. Ola Snow. She's the Chief Human Resource Officer for Cardinal Health, and she'll be introducing today's speaker. Please join me in welcoming Ola to the podium.
Good afternoon. I have on my list to hijack that video if you didn't see it. What an amazing video, I think, to feature a great city that we live in, both from a diversity standpoint as well as an opportunity. It was, I've already decided to use it as part of my recruiting strategy. It's a wonderful way to portray our great city. It's also an honor for me not to just introduce Michelle Milford Morse, but it's also fun for me because I'm a fellow Southerner, so you're about to get 2 rounds of Southern dialect. And Michelle and I have already found common ground in that twang that you'll both hear from us. So, as I said, I'm honored to have the opportunity to introduce Michelle, who serves as the Vice President of Girls and Women's Strategies at the United Nations Foundation. She leads the United Nations Foundation work in promoting gender equality and the rights and agencies of all girls and women across the globe. She is the lead strategist for the Foundation's collaboration and partners to champion rights for all girls and women, and what an important job that is for us today. Michelle has deep expertise in global health as well as development issues that we'll hear about today. For many years, she's been really devoted in her life's work, has been promoting human health, human rights, with that particular focus on women and girls around the globe. She has worked with a variety of diverse partners, such as the Melinda Gates Foundation, along with Bill. She has worked with UNICEF USA, Live Strong, Sesame Workshop, Johnson & Johnson, and her alma mater of the University of Texas, so hook 'em horns. Today, she will shine a bright light on the inequality and inequity that is happening across the globe and how it affects women and girls, their health. And not only will she help us understand those issues that are going on, but more importantly, how we can help, how we can empower and engage to make progress. Making progress in gender equality and equity is something that is very important to our organization at Cardinal Health. It's important to our organization, our leaders, to myself, and to our CEO, Mike Kaufman. So we are particularly honored to be part of this conversation and able to sponsor today's event. So please help me welcome Michelle Milford Morse. Thank you. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, my sister in Southern accents, Ola. Very kind introduction. She's right. I can't hide the Texas twang. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm so grateful to the Columbus Council on World Affairs for inviting me. Thank you to the Cardinal Health Foundation, to all of the partners that help make today happen. And I hope among you are some students from the institution known until 1878 as the, let's see here, the Ohio Agricultural and Mechanical College, now known as the Ohio State University. Thank you especially for welcoming a very loyal graduate of the University of Texas. Patrick asked if a Longhorn was brave enough to come here to Buckeye country. Dare accepted. Yep. So beyond defending school pride, I always find it such a privilege to meet people wherever they gather, these global citizens. You are clearly people who understand that we have problems without passports, as the late UN Secretary General Kofi Annan called them, and that our fates and futures are tied, which Ted Turner, the founder of the UN Foundation, said after committing $1 billion, 1/3 of his personal wealth, to the UN and its ideals 22 years ago. I thought of our founder a lot when I prepared these remarks. Ted Turner is a native Ohio. He was born in this state 80 years ago, and I think he has also been your past speaker. So I'm aware that my path to Columbus and this podium follows that of a person of astonishing generosity and vision, who established the rights of girls and women and global health as founding priorities of the UN Foundation from the very start, and who has maintained a remarkable devotion since then to the planet and its people, our world of neighbors. Since our founding, the UN Foundation has partnered with governments, the private sector, foundations, and the public to leverage that $1 billion into more than $2 billion for the UN and its priorities. And we're motivated every step of the way by a determination to advance human dignity and well-being on a thriving planet. It's that imperative, the focus of our time today. The state of human dignity is in critical condition because globally, the health and well-being of girls and women is in critical condition. Well, what does that mean? Well, the medical terminology tells us to be that in critical condition is to have an uncertain prognosis. Vital signs are unstable or abnormal, and there are major complications. I want to talk to you today about some of those unstable and abnormal vital signs to address our state of relapse, which is evidenced, for example, by the Global Gag Rule, also known as the Mexico City policy, by vaccine hesitancy, and by the rise of maternal mortality in the United States. And I want to address the hope for a resuscitation, which I see in a renewed focus on women health workers and women in global health leadership. This relapse is emboldened by some persistent myths, 4 in particular, that I want to discuss with you today. And the resuscitation, our full recovery, well, that depends on all of you, but more on that later. So what exactly are we talking about? So you were promised to talk about health and gender equity. So let's talk about the state of both and let's diagnose the terms. Health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. It's not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And what about gender? Well, gender is just a social construct. It's not a biological one. It describes the culturally defined roles, expectations, attributes, and privileges associated with being male or female in any given context. Transgender and non-binary people have different gender identity, different gender expression that differs in their context. Gender is completely different than your biological sex. And what about gender equality? Well, that's the big ambition. It's the idea that we are all free, all of us, to fulfill our human potential and to make choices liberated from stereotypes, from discrimination, and the narrow confines of deeply ingrained social expectation. So that means I can become a seaplane pilot. That's my daydream job. And it means that the man who flew the jet here yesterday, Captain Butler, I learned, he can become a kindergarten teacher or a stay-at-home dad. And we can make those decisions without social sanction, insurmountable hurdles, or even laws that bar either of us from making or benefiting from those choices. The achievement of gender equality does not mean we all become the same, but instead that our rights, our responsibilities, our opportunities don't depend on whether or not we were born female or male, or whether you identify as something else entirely. Now, gender equity is different, and if you're the parent of more than one child, you practice the distinction between equality and equity every single day. If you have 2 children, They both get a healthy breakfast. They both get bundled in warm coats for the walk to class. You encourage your son to excel in history and art. You encourage your daughter to excel in math and science. They both get to play team sports after school. But if your son has a learning disability, he might get more parental assistance with homework or a tutor or something that your daughter doesn't require. And that's equity. It's so they can both do well in school. It's a compensation for cumulative, economic, social, or political disadvantages to make things more fair or just. So why does all this matter? Sex, gender, equality, equity. Well, it matters, first of all, because the binaries we often rely on to understand the world, woman, man, rich, poor, victim, perpetrator, healthy or not, are really insufficient. They greatly obscure the effects geography, race, class, age, sexual orientation, trauma, culture, and lived experience have on people and their happiness and their well-being. It matters because, as a groundbreaking new series from The Lancet, Gender Equality Norms in Health explains, gender equality and restrictive gender norms have a devastating effect on the health and well-being of all people throughout their lives and in every region of the world. It matters because we're all responsible. As a society, we create and sustain these shared cultural notions of gender together every day with our words, our attitudes, our behavior. And they are reinforced. Every time, for example, you see an advertisement that shows this put-upon wife, she's vacuuming and washing dishes at the same time, and then it portrays her completely competent husband as befuddled by a diaper. It matters because we made all this up. Gender norms are not inevitable. Gender-based power structures are not immutable. The privileges they confer are not immutable. And more equal distribution of power and rights is good for everybody. You've probably seen this on t-shirts a lot this month. Equal rights for others does not mean less rights for you or for me. It's not a pie. And maybe you think about that next week if you get some pie during 4th of July. So we built this all up, which means if we are brave, we can knock it all down. And that matters because gender inequality norms and the discrimination and disadvantage they exert are particularly bad for girls and women and their health and their survival. So girls and women are not equal anywhere in the world. Globally, girls and women are more likely to be illiterate. They are less likely to control financial assets, such as land. They are less likely to have access to financial services, like a savings account or insurance. They are less likely to benefit from technology, from information, from an education. Her mobility is limited. Her time is not hers. She spends probably on average at least twice as much time doing unpaid care work and unpaid activities than the men around her. So of course, she's more likely to be economically dependent on men, and she's more likely to be poor. Girls and women do not enjoy equal protection or opportunity under the law in the majority of countries. She may live in one of 32 countries where she has to ask for permission to apply for a passport from her husband. She might live in one of 30 countries that legally designates men as the head of the household. She might live in one of 19 countries in which she is obligated by the law to obey her husband. And what about her health? She's more likely to be visually impaired or blind. In some places, her childhood could be marked by genital mutilation and ended in forced marriage. In some of those same places, she's 8 times more likely to be infected with HIV than her male peers. No matter where she lives, she could be one in 3 women who experience physical or sexual violence at some point in her lifetimes. She's more likely to be used as a weapon of war, and in a lot of places, reliable access to contraception is uncommon, while dying in childbirth is too common. Now, many organizations are collecting, documenting, and distributing all of these gender gaps. And everywhere in the world, from the US to Uzbekistan to Uruguay, they are growing or stagnating. They are not closing. And it may seem then like we're all marching together towards gender equality for all, but the data tells us that progress has been too slow, too incremental, too fragile, and too reversible. So accelerating progress, going in the opposite direction, protecting all that we have gained, will continue to depend then on the clarity with which we see the world and the choices we and our leaders make about its people. So clarity and choices are both essential here and often confused by some stubborn myths. So let's knock those down too. I got 4 for you. Myth number one is that this topic, gender and health, is only about girls and women, and it's not. We have established that gender is a powerful determinant of health, and in societies where boys are more valued than girls, which is many of them, boys are more likely to receive better nutrition, immunization, and timely medical care. But advocates for global health and gender equality, we've been saying this for decades, and our challenges persist. So, to show how pervasive and powerful gender inequality is, let's talk about boys and men too. A story here. My senior fellow at the UN Foundation, Geeta Rao-Gupta, recognized this years ago. She was leading a research project on why men and women in long-term stable relationships were getting infected with HIV in really large numbers. And the project's data showed that while the culture of silence that shrouded sexual interactions, it combined with the norms of male and female sexuality that cast men as assertive and all-knowing and more adventurous, and women as sexually naive and submissive. Well, that dynamic increased both women and men's vulnerability to HIV because it prevented the men from speaking up when they lacked information. It prevented them from seeking help when they had symptoms. It contributed to homophobia, but it also cast women as passive participants in their own sexual destinies and made them more vulnerable too. The research and related studies established what at the time was kind of a radical idea that we now take for granted, and that is that gender dynamics play a key role in health-seeking behavior. Among boys and men, we find higher rates of risk-seeking behavior. We find more substance abuse, more mental health problems. Globally, men are 2 times more likely than women to commit suicide. They are predominant victims of homicide, and they generally have shorter lifespans due to social factors as well as biological ones. The research tells us that here in the United States, teenagers who more strongly identify with gender norms linked to maleness and masculinity, both among boys and girls, they are more likely to adopt drugs, to be physically attacked, to engage in delinquency, and to suffer depression. So myth number one is that this is just about girls and women, and it's not. Gender equality and restrictive norms and stereotypes are making all of us, everywhere, less healthy and less free. So speaking of freedom, my second myth is that when it is about girls and women, it is only about their sexual and reproductive health and rights and who controls those things and how, and it isn't. But before we topple that myth, it would be irresponsible for me to say that those issues don't have a profound impact on the lives of girls and women. Governments at all levels, right now, at the UN and other fora and capitals, are spending an obscene amount of time figuring out how to control girls and women and families, how to deny them the human dignity that accompanies the fundamental right to determine the number, spacing, and timing of their children, and whether to become a parent at all. Today, there are more than 214 million women around the world who want to prevent their next pregnancy but aren't using high-quality, rights-based contraception. Imagine for a moment if you were robbed of that right to plan your family, to plan your life. Women with an unmet need for modern contraception account for 84% of unintended pregnancies in developing regions, where the complications from pregnancy and childbirth are the leading cause of death for adolescent girls. So meanwhile, around the world, 830 women die every day from preventable pregnancy-related complications. And yet, while globally that number represents a decline, here in the United States, maternal mortality has increased, and it's a result of poverty, untreated chronic conditions, racism, and disparity in access and treatment. So who are our peers in the rising levels of maternal mortality? Afghanistan, Swaziland, and Lesotho. And that should be the controversy. That's the scandal. But instead, we're absurdly preoccupied by the politicization of women's biology and health, sex education, family planning, menstrual health. None of these things are inherently controversial. We have allowed them to become controversial as a means of controlling girls and women. I think a lot of us have taken shelter in a really cozy place where you can feel kind of inoculated from that problem. And in certain states in the US and certain income brackets, you are. But when I talk about girls and women and global health, we're actually talking about the impact of health on women as well as the impact of women on health. For example, women are on the front lines of polio eradication, And in the 3 countries where it has not yet been eliminated, Afghanistan, Nigeria, and Pakistan, she is the only connection between a vulnerable child and a fragile health system. That child's survival rests on the trust her caretaker has in the woman who just knocked on her door, who brings facts about the safety and efficacy of vaccines and the peril of polio. She's also on the front lines of Ebola. More women than men die of Ebola, likely because they are their predominant role in paid and unpaid nursing and caregiving, a role that makes them the sentinels in any emerging epidemic, but risks taking more of their lives. Those examples matter because women are already 70% of workers in healthcare and social assistance in some countries, where demand for healthcare will only grow as our populations rapidly age. Indeed, countries with a greater share of female physicians have lower infant and maternal mortality rates, as well as greater life expectancy for everyone. In these same countries, they have more doctors per capita. So it suggests that when everybody can pursue careers in medicine, regardless of gender, the population benefits as a whole. And when I read that, I thought about Juntendo University in Japan. You may have read about this, but several of the Japanese medical schools were found to have rigged their admissions procedures to give men an unfair advantage. In a country that's almost famously known for its aging population and for its chronically understaffed hospitals, and has the lowest level of doctors among all OECD countries at 21%. Now, some of our global leaders are gathered in Osaka, Japan right now for the G20, and I hope that when they toast women at when they clink their glasses at various receptions, I hope they toast the women in Japan who just outperformed their male counterparts on the Juntendo entrance exams now that the university is no longer manipulating the results. Beyond healthcare, our global economy also runs on healthy women whose work likely provided the clothes you're wearing today, the coffee you had this morning, and maybe the tea you'll enjoy this afternoon. Women around the world are entering the workforce at unprecedented rates, especially in developing countries. Almost 200 million women work in jobs related to the global supply chain in sectors like flower farming, coffee, tea, and cocoa production, garment manufacturing. Women make up 50 to 80% of this workforce. And so the private sector has seen this as an unprecedented opportunity to create workplaces that work for women and to provide them the things they need while helping them get the thing that they want, which is a greater return for their business activities. And these things they're doing to create workplaces that work for women have also been shown to reduce absenteeism and improve productivity and morale. There's a great example in Kenya, a clothing manufacturer called Gila, which works with Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, Wrangler. It provides a variety of services to its workforce, 75% of which are women. They have free on-site daycare. They have a health clinic staffed by a nurse midwife. So they get routine mobile screening for cervical cancer. They get contraception, blood pressure testing, HIV information, nutrition information. And in partnership with the UN Foundation, the Universal Access Project, companies like Nordstrom and Unilever and some of the biggest apparel manufacturers in Southeast Asia and in India are making commitments to workplaces that work for women because they want to yield that triple bottom line, which means they want financial returns, but they also want social good and a positive environmental impact. So we're seeing a transformation in the private sector, but we need one in the global health ecosystem too. There were several reports released earlier this year by the World Health Organization and Global Health 50/50, which showed that 3 out of 10 global health organizations don't have parity in their senior management. 72% of the executive heads are men, 70% of board chairs are men, and men are 50% more likely to reach senior management. So women health workers, the ones I've been talking about on the front lines of Ebola and polio and so many other challenges, are concentrated into lower status, lower paid, and often unpaid roles. Women occupy only 25% of senior roles in the global health field. So we have a situation where men are making the decisions and women are doing the work. We can and we have to do better for a more inclusive and sustainable system to deliver care that is responsive to that user perspective, and that, if nothing else, responds to the clear imperative to deliver nothing about us without us. So myth number 2 is that is not only about reproductive rights. It's not. The role, the rights, the relevance of women across these issues, from leadership to community care to epidemic response, and within these structures is your concern as well as mine. Myth number 3 is that the private sector, foundations, and innovators will solve all of this alone. And they won't, because I know you were hoping for that. It's true that these stakeholders, the bold philanthropists that you know about, the private sector leaders pushing for progress, they're essential. And then we have the great promise of technology. The future is going to be cool. There's going to be a proliferation of low-cost, easy-to-use, sometimes reusable, point-of-care devices that are going to allow us to test blood pressure, resuscitate newborns, access blood oxygen levels. We're going to use mobile devices to track epidemic outbreaks. We're going to have a broader use of the HPV vaccine, which would be transformational. We have the potential for a malaria vaccine. And vaccines, which allow me to say again, are very safe and very effective, will be delivered by drones. Oxytocin, which can stop bleeding in childbirth. We have versions now that require neither refrigeration nor injection. We need all of it, and the private sector and foundations will ensure that. But remember that the role of philanthropy is to fill gaps, to solve for underlying underinvestment, to compensate when governments cannot or will not invest in people. Innovations can navigate the challenges of tilth and terrain and distance and deficiency. But what about those discriminatory laws? Social policy, fiscal policy, tax policy, governance. We have only the role and resources of governments. For me, this reality landed with a really heavy thud when I went to go work for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, an organization dedicated to the sacred notion that all lives have equal value, and one that I thought, as a person with a newly minted Master in Public Health, could solve all these problems by deploying the money of 3 of the richest people that ever lived: Melinda Gates, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett. Now, the money the Gates Foundation invests in global development is truly critical to our hopes for those lives. But my valued colleagues at Gates or any of the other really well-sourced foundations will tell you it's also just a drop in the bucket compared to what governments can do and what they should spend. It's why so many foundations and civil society organizations invest so explicitly in getting more and better money from governments, and then also in supporting recipient governments in their efforts to prioritize people, guided by good data and evidence-based policy. Because even in the most developing countries, those domestic resources that they have, they outweigh all other sources of funds, even foreign aid. So consider this. The National Institutes of Health, it invests nearly $40 billion annually in medical research that's relevant to global health, from the burden of non-communicable disease to cholera to other infectious diseases to mental health to the unique challenges of women. Almost $40 billion. Annually, one single agency. In 17 years, the Gates Foundation made grants worth about $45.5 billion, in an act of astounding benevolence towards humanity, but an amount that approaches the NIH's single-year budget. You can look at all the other major foundations. Rockefeller has $17 billion. They've granted $17 billion in their existence. Michael Bloomberg, $8.8 billion in his lifetime. Ford Foundation, they have a $12 billion endowment. Now, we have billions of reasons to be grateful to these organizations, which have funded everything from the civil rights movement to tobacco cessation to Sesame Street to sustainable cities. But they cannot match what your government can do and what your government must do. We have in the U.S. a long bipartisan legacy of lending a hand and leading the way. PEPFAR, the U.S. President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. PMI, the President's Malaria Initiative. Both were established by George W. Bush and expanded by President Barack Obama. The U.S. government has supported international family planning and reproductive health for 50 years. And it is the single largest donor to international family planning efforts around the world. So you might think then that we are spending a fortune on financial assistance. But according to the Nonpartisan Congressional Research Service, we are spending approximately 1.2% of the federal budget on foreign aid, approximately $49 billion. And 1/3 of that is dedicated to military and security assistance funds. So it's not the traditional humanitarian aid that you think about. Allow me to add that the U.S. is also remains the largest donor to the United Nations, contributing $10 billion annually. That investment helps the UN provide food to 90 million people in 80 countries, vaccinate 45% of the world's children, assist more than 70 million refugees, maintain peace through more than 100,000 UN peacekeepers, which, by the way, is the largest deployed military in the world, fight poverty, and defend maternal health, saving the lives of 30 million women. The UN's work in these areas promotes foundational American values and advances our nation's core foreign, national security, global health, and economic objectives, all while advancing the Sustainable Development Goals, which are our blueprint for achieving more peace and more prosperity while leaving no one behind. Now, I know it sounds expensive, but U.S. dues to the UN amount to 0.1% of the entire federal budget. So you are getting an extraordinary return on your taxpayer investment in bilateral global health programs, in humanitarian assistance, and in contributions to the United Nations. Since you're in this room and members of the Columbus Council on World Affairs, you likely know all this, and you talk about it with friends over dinner, or maybe while enjoying a pie at 4th of July next week. But it's worth reminding you of this for two really important reasons. Number one, unlike the efforts of private foundations in the private sector, your government works for you. And number two, because the U.S. is by far the largest single donor, decisions made by those people who work for you have an outsized impact on real lives, especially the lives of girls and women. The Mexico City policy offers a really dramatic and deeply disconcerting example. It is also known as the Global Gag Rule, and it was reinstated and expanded by the Trump administration in January 2017. It prevents foreign, non-governmental organizations from receiving U.S. funding if they provide information about, referrals to, or services for legal abortion, or advocate for legalized abortion, even if using their own non-U.S. funds. That's why it's called the Gag Rule. It is U.S. policy to tell non-U.S. organizations what they can and cannot say or do with their own money. And that is as a condition of receiving our crucial foreign assistance. We are asking organizations to decide between receiving our support or providing comprehensive health care in the most vulnerable communities. Because the policy was expanded by the current administration, and for the first time ever, it now affects $8.8 billion in U.S. global health assistance, rather than the $600 million annually earmarked for family planning that it used to affect. That means, for the first time ever, the Global Gag Rule extends to a wide range of other global health concerns, including cancer prevention, maternal and child health, nutrition, HIV/AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis, neglected tropical diseases. Reports we are now hearing from Uganda, Kenya, and Colombia echo the finding of that recent report from the International Women's Health Coalition. Girls and women will die needlessly because of a policy that was enacted and supported by people who work for you and for me. Which leads me to my fourth and final myth, the myth that your opinion and your voice doesn't matter. I know what you're thinking. I just knew she was going to make this all my problem. Well, hopefully I've already convinced you of that. At this point, maybe you're a little more informed, maybe you're a little mad, maybe you got a couple of questions, maybe you want to write a letter, maybe you want to thank a congresswoman for her vote on the Global HER Act, or maybe you want to write a check. Well, good, because I'm telling you that you are important, and I'm telling you you are not powerless. And I know you're thinking, but I'm just one person. Said 7.5 billion on the planet. Said 327 million citizens of the U.S., said almost 900,000 citizens of Columbus, Ohio, said the 66,000 students on the campus of The Ohio State University, and the more than 1,000 high school students that are part of your Global Scholars Program, said the 150 people in this room right now. You are all powerful, and you are all in the center of networks of people to whom you can say, vaccines work. The UN is a smart investment. The Global Gag Rule is deadly. And Japan really messed up with that medical school examination situation. Go forth and proclaim. Gender equality is better for all of us. Harmful gender norms are part of a tired construct that we can knock down. Be a protector of progress and demand more. Or, as Melinda Gates recently said, what ultimately changes societies is a group of people coming together and saying, we want something different. So be that group, want something different. I'll join you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. We're going to have time for some Q&A, and the way we do that here at the council is by using the note cards on your table. Write your question, hold it up, and someone will come around and bring them to me so I can weave them into the discussion. So please do that to make our conversation even more lively. So thank you, Michelle. Let's get this mic going. For ruining the rest of my day.
That is a definite disadvantage of the job some days.
Yes. No. But what I wanted to ask was, how do you find inspiration? Like, do you see any beacons of hope in terms of, I'm thinking particularly of countries that you think, man, they're really doing this well. I think about the rise of women leaders in government, like the New Zealand Prime Minister and others. Like, where do you see beacons of light that might point a path for us as a government?
Yeah, it won't surprise you. In governments around the world, and a lot of them are Scandinavian, and a lot of them are scattered in other places. In governments where they are prioritizing parental leave for mothers and fathers, and where they are, where companies are ensuring that their male employees take parental leave, where there's equal opportunity for education, where they are trying to close the pay gap, where they're trying to make sure that women entrepreneurs have equal access to venture capital. There are some bright spots in some of those countries. And you're right. I mean, I think now we have Ethiopia, Moldova, Slovakia. We have this kind of Bahamas. The 3 women in charge of the UN in Cyprus, the head positions in Cyprus are all women. Like, there are dots all over the place. And when I say that when girls and women are equal nowhere in the world, that is true. They are closer in some parts of the country, but I think what we get aggravated by is that the progress globally has been so slow, as I said, and so fragile. But the other point of inspiration, I think, is that at least we're talking about it. You invited me here to talk about this. That may not have happened a decade ago, and certainly not before that, because I think there's been this hesitancy to acknowledge that this is a choice we're all making, to see one group as more powerful and a less group as less powerful, more worthy and less worthy. Slowly, we're questioning that choice. You are all questioning that choice, and that, for me, is a source of inspiration.
Great, thank you. I saw in the paper today, and many of us have seen over the last days and weeks, the migrant children and women who have either died or been injured. Does that come into global health conversations, the migration and
quite a
impact?
lot? Yeah, quite a lot. And I too, I'm reading these stories. I'm so disturbed by what is happening. I'm thinking about a lot of the UN conventions that require countries to ensure regular, safe migration and that we uphold the rights of human beings. I think one of the things that's happening, and here's another thing that you can all do, is that we're allowing our political leaders to confuse some things. There's regular economic migration, which happens when someone lands at LAX, they overstay their visa, they are here to work, they pay taxes, and they have, by the way, lower crime rates than natural-born Americans. That's migration that surely our leaders can come together and figure out how to manage from a policy perspective, including how to defend the dreams of our DACA students. What's happening on our southern border right now is a humanitarian crisis. That is not regular economic migration. Those are people fleeing horrifying levels of violence, and by the way, horrifying levels of gender equality in their countries. And I think it's really important for us to make sure that we tell our own elected leaders, we understand the difference between these two things, and we demand that you do something about it. Because I refuse to accept that our leaders on any of the parties can't put their heads together and do better for these kids and do better by this issue.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, questions, just raise your, there's some over there, note cards. All right. Can you talk a little bit about, so you talked about the growth of women in the workforce, and touched a little bit on technology. And I just think about this idea of like, as more and more women come into economic power and have access to technology, is that helping, sort of democratize power a little bit around traditional barriers, or not?
Well, yes and no. I mean, on the one hand, technology has been found to be a really useful tool in low resource regions and emerging economies to help women connect with other women so that women don't have to stand alone when they're standing up for injustice. There are now platforms where we can connect women to other women so they can stand together, which is really important. That's one area where I see as technology as being really helpful. But all over the world, we have to do a better job of making sure that girls have access to that technology. There's still a mobile deficit. Women are less likely to have a mobile phone, or it's controlled by the father, the uncle, the brother in the household. They don't have equal access to it. So we have to do a better job there. And earlier this week, there was a report that closing the gap in computer science, even in our country, was going to take like another century. And the New York Times article suggested that we may never close that gap. So technology, you can see these places where it holds such promise for gender equality, but we're gonna have to really step up our efforts to close some of those gaps in access and fluency.
Got it. Great. Some great questions from people. A lot wanting to know more about what to do. Let's take this one first. From your point of view, what are the top 3 policy positions that U.S. citizens should be championing to maximize positive impact for U.S. global gender equality?
Well, first, I think we have to lead by example. So we, in this country, as I suggested, we have to get past this kind of obsession with controlling women's bodies. It really prevents women from enjoying equal opportunity and their rights. And we need to lead by example globally on that issue. Second, we need to do a better job here of closing the pay gap. The pay gap is really corrosive to women's abilities to provide for their families and to have equal opportunities. And that is something in other countries, they're doing a better job of forcing companies to expose their pay gap. So that's another one. Another one I would say is that, as I mentioned, your taxpayer investment in foreign aid is critical, and it's working. So thank your member of Congress when they vote to maintain these levels of foreign aid, when they vote to support PEPFAR, UNICEF. Support them in doing that. I said that the United States government is by far the largest single donor, but as a share of GDP, we're near the bottom. So we're not doing something that we can't afford. We are doing less with more, while other countries have less and are giving more. But I think the first baby step is tell your elected leaders, thank you for doing that. I know it's important. I know it's important to our national security. I know it's important for the lives and livelihoods of other people. Thank you for doing that. Please maintain it.
Good. That was one of the questions here that said, can you speak more about what we can do? Write a letter to whom? Our Congress is constantly battling for issues around reproductive health and safety. How can we really make a difference? Who will listen?
Well, so I'd said that your government works for you. And what I mean literally by that is that how many of you have stood up and spoken at a town hall, or written a letter, or made a phone call, or a donation? Good. That's great. There's a deficit. Women do less of that. And it may be because of that unpaid care burden. They're taking on the second and third shift at home, so they can't make time to be civically engaged. But nonetheless, not enough people are doing that. I know it's a commitment of time, but you have to do it. And then you have to vote. 100 million Americans did not vote in the last presidential election, far more than voted for either candidate or any of the other candidates. More. So you have to do that, and not just in federal elections, but school boards, cities, state-level elections. They work for you. So you have to embrace your birthright and do that. That's the only way that people will pay attention to the things that you care about.
Okay. This question is about race. Thank you for speaking with us. When we do achieve equality among genders in healthcare, there will still be discrepancies between how white women and women of color are seen or serviced within the healthcare system. What are your thoughts on how to address this? Women of color are dying at alarming rates in our own country.
exclamation point under that question. Right now, a white woman with a high school diploma is less likely to die giving birth than a black woman with a PhD.
Wow.
So we are doing a horrible, horrible job. Not only are men and women unequal, but women who are indigenous, African American women, Latina women, transgender women, lesbian women, their outcomes are even worse than mine. And it shocks the conscience when you start digging into how those intersectional issues affect women. I think a rights-based response then has to be grounded in just the human rights of equality, equality, equality for all people, no matter your gender, no matter your gender expression, no matter your class, your race, your age, any of those things. Older women also have poor outcomes in some of these dynamics as well. So thank you for the question. I have no easy answers to say about that except for that it is my responsibility and yours to point out that all the things I'm talking about, from reproductive justice to the pay gap, are worse for some categories of women. And we are all responsible for that. We're all responsible for that.
Thank you. Some argue that in such a large country as the US, it is difficult to enact such, quote, socialist policies that support women, such as paid parental leave. How would you respond to that?
Well, you're leaving $12 to $28 trillion on the table. I mean, those are conservative estimates done by McKinsey and echoed by a lot of researchers who are looking at what we stand to gain when women have equal opportunity in the marketplace. So I get you could call them socialist policies, but like, are you interested in a growing economy or not? Are you interested in countries that can be your trading partners or not? Are you interested in more peace and prosperity, a fairer society or not? I mean, so there is a lot to gain through gender equality, but there's also just a lot to lose. Also, are you happy with the way things seem right now? I would suggest no, because you're here, so.
More questions. Why do you think leaders are so slow to seek gender equality, or at times completely resistant?
I think there's an information gap, number one. Maybe the things that I said you're very familiar with, maybe some of the things I said were a surprise to you, but I do think there's an information gap. I think in the United States in particular, because the imagery looks good, right? 130 women in Congress, women governors of both parties, the imagery looks really good. And so we, maybe in some corners of the United States, we've adopted kind of a patient satisfaction that things are going our way and that we're all on this kind of steady, slow march upward. And I don't think people understand the data's terrible. I mean, it's like the progress has been so incremental. So there's an information gap, first of all. There's a lot of our elected leaders at all levels probably are unaware of that. They also are probably unaware that there's a policy remedy for some of these things. Mm-hmm. But more importantly than that, I think there's two other dynamics at work. One is this idea that there's a finite amount of power and equality, and that if you give it to some other people, you get less, which is not true. Like I said, it's not a pie, right? There's not a finite amount of that, but I think there's a lot of fear among people who don't want to give up their privilege or their power, when that's actually not what we're asking anybody to do. But I think the final thing is that these are just choices. With any social policy, we make decisions about whether or not a person's going to sleep on the street or tonight or not. We make decisions that affect racial inequality, and we make decisions based on to sustain gender equality. It's just a decision, and usually it's a decision. The decision to maintain those things is kind of based in fear. So that's why it's so important that you're here. You've decided not to be scared. You decided not to be scared of the world as it is. You've decided not to be scared to know more, because these are just choices. It doesn't have to be this way.
Thank you. Next question. We'll just have time for maybe one or two more questions,
Sure.
But this one takes a different route. Have you seen recent ramifications in global health due to climate change that is directly linked to climate change?
Yeah, so if you care about gender equality, it is time to saddle up on climate change too. There's hardly increasingly any differences between these things. women and girls in a lot of places, have to travel far because they're responsible for collecting water and they're responsible for collecting wood. They're not in school, they're responsible for doing those things. And as we have deforestation and fewer freshwater sources, those girls and women are going to travel further and further to get those things. By the way, cooking with that wood that they find is terrible for their health. There's another problem we need to solve. It also causes horrible amounts of pollution that influence climate change. The further they travel too, the more likely they are to be victims of sexual violence. So climate change is only going to make that situation worse for girls and women. Girls and women too, because climate change is going to cause lots of migration away because of rising sea levels. And we've seen from studies that families, when they're moving into cities, they're more likely to marry off their very, very, very young daughters out of economic desperation. It's another way it's going to affect them. Also, girls who are migrants are much more likely to die and much more likely to be subject to sexual violence. Years ago, Oxfam did this study. They were trying to figure out why it was that more girls and women died in the tsunami in Sri Lanka than men and boys. And they figured out a couple of things. The girls were expected to wear long skirts. No one taught them to climb trees. No one taught them to swim. And they were likely by the shoreline because they weren't at school, because they were taking care of kids in the family. So think about this with some of these storms and rapidly rising water levels. Think about that playing out over and over and over and over again. And also, we don't count women. So women are missing in data sets. Like you hear about the DHS and the multi-indicator cluster surveys, like all this data we collect about people. Girls and women are missing in a lot of those because they're hidden in households and they're married off, which means we don't actually know where all the girls and women are in the world, and we don't know what affects them. So we can't make climate policy, and we're making climate policy based on things we don't know about where they are and what their vulnerabilities are. So this light bulb has recently gone off for me, that it can't just be about gender equality. It's about the planet that women live on, and climate change is a threat multiplier for girls and women.
Wow, great. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to ask you to help thank our speaker today. She'll be here to answer questions. Please, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
With each time you speak, you open up more questions and things that we want to delve into and that need delving into. So I appreciate everyone being here today. We thank you for your thoughtful listening and willingness to talk about difficult issues that affect us here locally and around the world. And please enjoy the rest of your afternoon. We are adjourned. Thank you.